Good evening. Welcome everybody to the first Local Stories of 2022. We started this programme last year in lockdown, and it's our online programme about local people and places. We covered all sorts of different topics last year, and sometimes it was to coincide with a particular event, a month, a celebration. Sometimes it was about a particular story, and sometimes it's about a particular object. And for our special event this evening, it relates to a piece of film. This is our first evening event, and that's because some of the people who are involved in the film live outside the UK. So we've done this to fit in with different time zones. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Edward Kopisaru, who first got in touch with me with his friend Jeff about this particular piece of film that I really hope you're going to enjoy watching tonight. So Edward, shall I hand over to you?
Thanks, Emily. Please shout. I know that the fan of my computer sometimes makes me hard to hear, so if I need to speak up, please shout. But really my job this evening is to explain how this evening came about. After my mother died, we had a memorial lunch, and we tried to get somebody to represent each period in her life. And for the voluntary work that she did when living in Amersham, we asked Jeff to come. My sister and I asked Jeff to come to a lunch that we had in London, and he mentioned this film. I had a very dim memory of this film. Because it was filmed, my mother made the film, but with the help of Haddock, who's well known to Amersham Museum supporters for his local photography. And I was aware that I was also roped in as a child actor way up until the age of 4, I think, in Ron's other film projects. So Jeff shared a DVD made from a VHS made from the celluloid, and it was all a bit grainy, and I had a conversation with Emily, and it sort of spiraled from there. But the result of it is that the original celluloid has now been presented to the museum, and this is a sort of first airing of it this evening for the museum, with a little bit of the memories this evening forming part of the context in which the object itself can become part of the museum collection. And it has some lovely vignettes of what Amersham looked like in the 60s, recorded as moving pictures, which may not otherwise be the case. So that's where I come in. The actual thing it was brought filmed to describe was a new initiative called Service by Youth. And so Jeff is going to introduce Service by Youth, then we're going to watch the film, and then we've got with us Barry Woodhead, who was one of the original members, Pauline Leonard, another, and Richard Bott, and along with Jeff, are 4 members of the Service by Youth group from the 1960s. And then I think after we're done, if anybody else has got any memories of things that were going on in terms of local voluntary work at that date, and I'm sure Emily will open it up to discussion. But thanks everybody for coming. Jeff, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Edward. If people cast their minds back, and I must confess it's a very long time ago, the award scheme was introduced in 1956, and it was taken up by the uniform organisations like the Scouts and the Girl Guides, and the schools started to develop Duke of Edinburgh Award programmes for their pupils, starting with the bronze, then the silver, and if they stayed at school long enough to do A-levels, they could move on to the gold. But there was not a widespread, shall we say, familiarity with the award scheme outside of that. People who left school in those days at 16 dropped any work they were doing on the award scheme because there was no means by which they could continue with it. So some gold award holders who had already achieved their award decided to put something back into the community and formed an organisation which would spread the word about the award scheme, with visits to schools, with visits to youth clubs, boys clubs. And coming out of that organisation, which became known as Service by Youth, they decided to make a film which would then take the story that much further. And this was distributed around the country. Do we move to the film now, Edward?
Yep, I can put it on now. So the film is about 16 minutes long. So hope you can sit back and enjoy.
To our last gold residential course with mixed feelings. For although this was to be the final stage of our award, we always look forward to being at Woodrow.
Hello, welcome to Woodrow. Do come this way. Do sit down. I was telling the others about the history of the house. In fact, we just reached the introduction of the Green Lady, whose portrait you see hanging behind me. She lived here in Cromwellian times and has since paid periodic visitations in ghostly form.
We soon got cracking, and for us girls it was straight into the kitchen. The theme of the course was entertaining your friends and several VIPs.
Although most of the domestic side was left to the girls, it wasn't long before we boys were roped in to help out, and they certainly seemed to find plenty for us to do. I began to wonder, now that our awards were completed, how we could get together again afterwards to try to carry out the Duke of Edinburgh's wish, that Gold Award holders, like ourselves, should plough back into the scheme some of the experience and enjoyment they had gained from it, particularly by helping others to achieve their awards.
This idea of Margaret's was just what we all needed, and so as for youth was soon formed. The first job we heard of was the conversion of a derelict house into a youth club. We thought that we might have bitten off more than we could chew, but we had a go. By evening we were all exhausted. We hardly needed a lullaby.
Sit by my side, come as close as the air, share in a memory of days, and wander in my world, dream about the pictures that I played.
Although we were very enthusiastic, we found it difficult to commit ourselves regularly to service by youth activities. We were all very involved in studies and careers, but we decided that one of our most important aims should be to help school leavers continue with their awards afterwards. Not all the school heads were quite as helpful as Mr. Smith, but on the whole our offers of help were welcome. We held a social evening at Woodrow to sort out the boys and girls, and each of us undertook to look after one small group.
One of the many enthusiastic adults who helped us was my local vicar. He and the instructor offered every facility to the two in my group who wanted to take up bell ringing for their interest.
We usually practice on a doll, but this time we had little Edward. He was much more wriggly and certainly noisier, but the mother didn't worry, for the Red Cross was there to see he didn't come to any harm.
thoroughly enjoyed the makeup and hairstyles course. It is always a very popular design for living subject. We tried very hard, but we never quite managed to make ourselves as attractive as our teacher.
I was in my element, for the boys in my group chose a subject which was my hobby too.
Walking may be slower, but it's certainly a great deal surer, and I am much happier helping with an expedition.
The expedition was the only thing at which some of us girls jibbed, and the alternative of a worthwhile project seemed to drop from heaven. My home is in Canada, and Elaine comes from France.
Yes, and for me too. Working on the farm was perhaps the most happy part of taking my award.
Not all our activities were quite so enjoyable, and our chairman soon roped us in for more serious work.
Did anyone take the award at school, and if so, how did it fit in with examinations?
Jane and Chris, you were at school when you took the award. Lectures were arranged during after-school time, and so this did not interfere with our examination work whatsoever.
It has been said that the scheme is difficult to fit in with the club programme. Do you agree?
I think Celia or John could answer this question. Well, no, I don't agree with this. Most of the subjects I took were incorporated in the youth club programme.
I should like to ask any unattached participants how they managed to find their instructors and assessors, and also whether the award scheme has helped them in any special way.
I'm sure Margaret and Stuart can answer this question.
Yes, I made personal contact through instructors and organisations.
It helped me because I'm in the police force and it helps me in my upbeat moments.
Would the panel agree that it's much easier to set the award scheme through a uniformed organisation because candidates can restrict themselves to the set programme of that organisation?
Uniform groups, that must be Bill or Dorothy.
Yes, I would agree that it is easier, because the Duke of Edinburgh's award has been woven into our existing badge systems.
Having dropped the award scheme, what made you take it up again? Kathleen, please. Having started the scheme at school, it seemed a pity not to take it up again, as it was something to aim at and try and achieve.
We only started in a small way, but news of our group soon spread, and Gold Award holders in other areas became interested in our activities. Our first invitation came from Brighton, and we gladly accepted a day by the sea, before spending an evening with Brighton Gold Award holders. We have since made other visits to different places, and now we very much hope that these Gold Award holders will look and work beyond the gold.
The film would give you some idea of the background of the people involved at the time, who said that having completed their awards, they wanted to put some work back into the award scheme, over and above what was already being done by the uniformed services, by the schools, and by some of the central county youth authorities. And from my own personal point of view, I came back. I'd left school at 16 to join a local firm of accountants. I came back to Service by Youth when Mrs. Gracie Pocock, who was the chairman of Service by Youth, and some of my old school friends turned up at Chesham Boys Club. And that brought me back into the fold. And there were others who were similarly unattached, who came in and formed part of a very strong group. And over the next 3 years, we did courses at Green Park, Aston Clinton, on things like mime movement and improvisation. I did a junior leadership training course there, and at Devonshire Street House in London, which was the headquarters of the National Association of Youth Clubs. And I became assistant leader at Chartwood Youth Club for a few years before I then changed jobs and moved to a firm in London. And I think this is a regular story of people who have been brought in and have done the things that are required and been assessed as such. And I think full credit must be given to people like Mrs. Pocock, Lady Diana Caposaro, who certainly was my mentor and made things possible for me to do. And people like Pat Hazel, who was part of the local education authority youth service. So I think, you know, similar stories will be told to you now by Richard, by Barry, and by Pauline, if they would like to come in by turn. Can anybody hear me? Hear me, Peter?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. Sorry. I just wanted to say that Pauline was a little ahead of me on the award scheme work. And when we made the film, she became the film secretary and was responsible, obviously, for the distribution of the film to those youth clubs and local authorities that wish to see it. So, Pauline, do you have a comment to make at this stage?
Yes, I had the job of distributing the film to various organisations, youth clubs, and county council people who had various connections with dealing with young groups. And it used to go off quite regularly. I think I can't really remember how long I did it for, how long it kept being sent out, but it must have been about 2 or 3 years at least. But and I think a lot of it was done by word of mouth. You know, people, various organisations wishing to see what we'd been up to.
It's such a super piece of film, and Jeff, I know you started talking about it in the interim, in the interruption, and Edward adding a few bits in, but now you've seen it all, I don't know if any of you who are in it, if Pauline, you want to say some more, or Barry and Richard who are here, perhaps you'd like to either talk about being involved in making the film or about the scheme itself.
I think
I could say a couple of words.
Barry, if you would like to contribute on, he was the mechanic, by the way, with the oil down his face. Barry?
Oh, Barry, you're muted. Richard, you're unmuted. Do you want to start? And Barry, I'll go and unmute you. Richard, did you say you wanted to say something?
Yeah, okay, I'm here.
You go ahead, and I'll try and get Barry unmuted.
Okay. Basically, when I left school, which was in '64, I did stay involved with the Service by Youth for a year or so, but I was at London University for a while, and then I went down to Crawley, and that kind of had a bit of a problem in distance, so I got disconnected at that time. So I really haven't had much to do with the award, except that when we were in Toronto, this would have been in the mid-late 80s, there was a reception for Duke of Edinburgh's Award gold holders that I did go to. And I seem to recall there being something to me in Victoria, British Columbia too. That would have been in the 90s. But I say my memory is very hazy. But I don't know whether anybody would be interested in what I've been up to for the last 50 odd years, but I could go on and on and on. But basically, I left England in 1970 and sailed across through the Panama up to British Columbia and worked there for 5 years. I met my wife Susan there, and we decided to take a 1-year honeymoon around the world, and we ended up in Toronto. And I worked there for about 15 years, and Susan was starting up a catering business, and then we went into the bed and breakfast inn business. But unfortunately, Susan had a rather bad car accident, which kind of put paid to the inn, so she retired from that. We went back to BC. We lived there from 1990 until about 2012, when we came back to Ontario. See, we've been flying all over the place. Came back to Ontario because Susan had family there, and that was important. And I was retired then, and we've been living happily in Port Hope ever since. And that's basically the sum of it.
Pauline, your experience?
Well, I still get involved in a lot of charity work, which stems from my service during the Gold Award, when I used to have to, which was an extra requirement during the Gold part of the award. And I used to visit this elderly lady. And even after the award finished, I continued to visit her until her death, actually. But even locally, I still get involved doing a lot of work with elderly folk at the day centre and coffee mornings, and also for some time I was a Sunday school teacher, and and I think perhaps these were things I might not have been drawn into if I hadn't have had some experience of meeting folks through the award scheme.
Pauline, it's Edward. Pauline, I'm very interested to know about this turkey business.
This turkey, well, the turkey, that didn't look very big when it came out the oven, did it? Certainly not £23. That's in my record book.
I should explain to everybody that Pauline didn't have a speaking part in the film, but she did baste the turkey. So
yes, I did. Yes, I can remember working very hard in the kitchen, and this turkey had to be basted every half an hour, and it used to terrify me. But when it came out of the oven, it certainly didn't look that size. So I'm not sure. Poetic license, maybe.
Was it a life skill that stayed with you, basting the turkey?
Yes, still do an awful lot of cooking, and baking as well. That gets distributed. Yes, a lot of scone making.
Very good. And I'm wondering if Barry's managed to unmute himself.
I think he has, yeah.
Well, yes. Having sent Emily away to try and find out, then I pressed the right button and we were okay. So sorry about that, Emily. Sent you on a wild goose chase. Yeah, my experience, interest, just to add on to what Jeff mentioned, that in the film I was the young mechanic in the grey and greasy clothes, sort of getting in the way, which my wife of 50 years says things haven't changed, but there we go. And so the film was very interesting. I first got involved actually when Jeff and I were at, as it was in those days, Chesham Technical High School, which was at the top of White Hill in Chesham. And we were both in the same class, and we were both subject to the most terrifying school secretary called Gracie Pocock, bless her, who was extremely firm, but she was very, very generous. And Gracie Pocock actually was, as Jeff will give us some more detail, but she was very much involved in, I think, Girls' Brigade, probably in those days called the Girls' Life Brigade, and various other organisations. And they had already started the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Now, interestingly, at the time, Chesham Technical School was a boys-only school, and we didn't, other than the normal school sports and things, there wasn't anybody with interest or facility to do something like the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. So to Gracie Pocock, this was, if you like, a field of rich pickings, and so she made it well known that she was interested in bringing the scheme to students at the school, and a few of us started in very, very early days. Certainly, as Jeff said, later on, after school, certainly I continued with the award scheme with the support of school secretary Gracie Pocock, and then met Jeff, as he said, when we visited his boys' club. And I think the real thing that brought it together was this lady brought together a group of people to work on this house in where we did the decorating. And I think that's why I first met you, Pauline Leonard, and she had come along as well. And so that sort of formed the kernel of a team of interested people working together as a team. And from that, I think, in my memory, we then continued with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, particularly in community service. And eventually we all got our gold awards, which was absolutely brilliant. The idea of the film, I actually think, Edward, may have been your mother's, to make something, because as you well know, your mum and dad had lots of really appropriate and excellent contacts in all parts of life and society. And I think actually it was her impetus that actually drove us to making the film, for which I think we're all very, very grateful. I mean, it was great fun. There is no doubt about it. We're 17, 18 years of age, you know, barely let out of home and school. And here's an opportunity to actually make a film. Well, this is just fantastic. And so I think we all took to it very, very well indeed. And that's why most of the film, there are people with lots of smiles on their face as much as anything, because we probably couldn't believe that we were actually doing this. You know, it's not the sort of backgrounds that we generally came from. But we all progressed. And service by youth progressed until, I think, as Richard, you probably said, you know, time moves on, we move into work and careers take us away from various places. So I think there was a general, if you like, what I would call a gentle disintegration over years. But then the basic club that we started, Service by Youth, I think, as Jeff will remember, did migrate into the Buckinghamshire Youth Association and then into a national organisation. So the roots of what we started actually did end up going, if you like, onto the national stage. In terms of what it's done for each of us, I think at that age, the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme in particular, I think was just the most excellent system for giving young people an opportunity to express themselves, challenge themselves, meet people they wouldn't have done otherwise, experiences that really help them for the rest of their life. And I think just in my own case, I don't know whether it was the DofE that started it, or I went to the DofE scheme because that's how I am. But certainly since Service by Youth, with the exception of 1 year, I have spent the rest of my life doing charity work and community service, partly through two major organisations, one which was called A Round Table, which was an organisation started by a Rotarian. And when I left them, I actually joined one or two other organisations, including the Rotary Club, where I still am, and I've served in that for over 30 years. And I also work in other charitable organisations and a hospital charity. And people say, well, what do you do now you're retired? Well, I just do more of what I've already done through my working life, which is trying to be of service to the community that I'm in. And I have to say, I do, you know, really, I think, thank both the DofE scheme and equally, in its own way, the Service by Youth. And I had the great fun and friendships we made in doing the film. So, you know, I think it's a brilliant thing. I think it's absolutely brilliant that you managed to find it, Pauline, and Jeff, that you've got it redigitized, and Emily, you've taken it on board as a wonderful history of Amersham. I mean, you know, growing up in that area, I actually lived in Little Chalfont, but I worked in Amersham. And I have to say, even after all these years, to my mind, that part of Buckinghamshire probably is the most wonderful place in the country to be able to live. So, so I might say I'm absolutely jealous of everybody who's still there, and I just think it's wonderful. And to know, Edward, you've still got associations with Shardlows, I just think is fantastic. That's me. There you go.
Barry, I think if we needed a modern day equivalent of that film, of what a testimony it is to be involved in that programme, you have just given it, and collectively you've just given it. You know, it's obviously for all of you really fostered a strong sense of community, and how, you know, as an individual or as a small group that comes together, you can really make a difference. And it's also, it seems to really equipped you all with sort of skills and confidence in your lives. It's really inspiring to hear you say all those things as well. You know, what started out as just a really lovely piece of film to watch. Would you like to?
I just have a thought, if I may, just sort of come in there. I'm one for generating all sorts of ideas while I'm thinking, and one of them, since the film was at one stage shown to His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, bless him, during his lifetime of service to the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. And now that it's got the glorious surroundings of the Amersham Museum, could we not use that as a platform to approach His Royal Highness Prince Edward, I think, who is the current leader of the DofE award scheme, and just suggest he might like to see it, together with the paperwork, I think, Edward, which you found, where there was a brief exchange with His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh in terms of showing the film to them. Oh, and here it is. If you can read sideways, everybody.
There we are.
Oh, here we go.
This is these letters. There's a little PDF that came through with some papers that my sister Ros found in my father's archives this afternoon, and there's a couple of letters with Buckingham Palace about the screening to His Royal Highness in not till 1969, actually, so 3 years after it came out. And somewhere we think there's actually a letter from him saying how marvellous he thought the film was, but we haven't found that yet. and it may turn up yet.
Shall I scroll down and show sort of show the rest of the document to people?
Yes. Do. Yes, carry on, Emily.
So Edward's sister also found some of the paperwork associated with the production. I don't know if any of you want to say anything.
Yeah, well, just to say, because I a few years ago in the one of the organisations I'm in, I was involved in making another film about some work we were doing. So I recognise this format, which is, for those who don't know, it's fairly obvious, but it's actually what they call, it's the running sheet for the whole of the film, to do with the timing of every piece of every clip, and then who was going to speak and when, and how the camera was to be shown and positioned, which is really quite an interesting document for those who just might be interested in sort of the detail goes into making even a relatively simple film as ours. But so you can imagine if someone's making a 3-hour blockbuster, ours was a 16-minute blockbuster in its day, but you know, for those who are doing large films, you can see the huge amount of work that that goes into it. But it was a very interesting piece of documentation. Here are the various quotes which people were going to give in turn, which was quite. The other nice thing about this is if you look at actually look at the paperwork, it's clearly written on an old style sort of mechanical typewriter with you know, not the electronic ones we have today. So nice piece of sort of almost engineering or social history, and just in the paperwork itself. There's me, my one bit Barry. I was in my element for the boys in my group and chose a subject which was my hobby, which was at that time it was motor mechanics and engineering, which is quite interesting.
Barry, I'm going to just interrupt because Jeff was very proud of his Austin 10, his first car, and said it was a very fine car. What was your opinion of it?
The Austin 10, well, if it was well maintained, was a pretty good old car. I have to say in those days, because the white car in the picture, which was a Ford 100E, which had for those who are interested, 3-speed gearbox, which is actually my first car. And but the Austin 10, they were all built in their own way so well. They were so mechanical. You know, there's virtually the only electronics were the light bulbs on, you know, on the outside of the car. Austin 10 was a nice car, actually. Austins did some good work in those days.
Yes, Jeff.
Actually, I have to say, better than my Ford Anglia. But
Jeff confided to me that actually the good thing about an Austin 10 was you could get 8 passengers in the back, provided the girls sat on the boys' knees.
Wouldn't be allowed today, Edward.
I might just interject, Edward. There's a photograph here now of one of the March '66. Just hold the photo there, Emily.
Yeah.
The second from the left, the lady, that is Gracie Pocock, who was the famous and infamous school secretary at Chesham Technical School, who was, as I said, stern but generous and kind as you would ever wish to meet, and was a lady who was singly instrumental in many of us starting and going through the Gold Award scheme. And despite what it might, just to say, despite what it might say about who was in the picture, the lady, well, the gentleman rather, right on the left-hand side is in fact her husband, Ernie Pocock, and he was a teacher at the school, and he taught practical subjects such as, I think bricklaying was his specialist, which is quite interesting. I'm thinking, given the shortage of houses, I perhaps should have gone into bricklaying rather than engineering, but still.
I think he also did engineering, didn't he, Barry?
Engineering, yes. That took me through my career into electronics and digital computing and research and design and telecommunications and all sorts of things. So, yeah, just engineering was a good start.
We're coming up for about an hour. I wonder if there's anyone who's joined us this evening who'd like to ask a question. If they want to, they can just unmute themselves and ask. If they want to ask anyone involved in the film.
I was going to ask, I've seen Adrian Porter's online. Adrian leads the Duke of Edinburgh's Award at Wickham Abbey School. And I was wondering how it compares to his experience of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award scheme today, if he's there and not too shy.
Hi there, Edward. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I do. I lead the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. I was quite surprised. I'd never heard of the Youth in Action organisation before, and the idea of pupils sort of going on immediately with their Gold Award, you know, isn't really done these days. You know, they do their Gold Award and then that's it. Many of them might come back to it later, but not as in the film. So that's quite interesting.
Certainly, by the time I got my Gold Award in the 1980s, I was also unattached, and it was thanks to Hotspur Youth Club. I mean, amongst the people in Gracie Pocock's circle were other women. Olive Beachy was one, and
Olive Beachy really helped me too, because I was unattached from Aylesbury. And I yeah.
Oh, sorry, yes, carry on, Pauline.
Sorry, no, I interrupted. No, Olive Beachy was a great help to me during my award and sort of really pushed me along, because although I started at a school youth club, that faded away, and I then sort of did it more or less on my own, joining up with various groups of people. One being Margaret McHugh, which she was really helpful to me, and I got to know her quite well. Yes, but Olive Beachy really helped and pushed me through the Gold Award.
And for me, it was
and joining up with all the Amersham people as well at various occasions.
For me, in the 80s, it was Audrey Locke who ran, I think, the Beaconsfield Red Cross, but also she ran a Duke of Edinburgh's Award through Hotspur Youth Club. So I was unattached, but was allowed to do my expedition through Hotspur Youth Club as part of the Beaconsfield Red Cross Cadets expedition. Because there are certain things in the Duke of Edinburgh's Award you can't do alone. There's an unattached. You've got to team up with other people, and that's what I think nowadays. Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong. It's quite unusual to do the Duke of Edinburgh's Award unattached, because first of all, so many places offer attachments, and secondly, it's much harder to do it unattached.
Edward, I very much enjoyed the film, but may I ask what effect you think the recent death of the Duke of Edinburgh will have on the Gold Award scheme, the future?
I think that was Tony, wasn't it, Tony? I think
Tony Westhead was asking the question. Tony, who was your question for?
It was for you, really,
okay.
Or for anybody, for the people, all those participants. What effect do you think the death of the Duke of Edinburgh might have on the future of the award scheme?
I suspect if it has any long-term effect, it might be that in other countries it loses its name, but it does exist in many countries under other names as national award schemes, but not named after the Duke of Edinburgh. So I think that he set up something which has got its own momentum, and it may be that in 100 years' time, people are astonished to know that whatever their national scheme is was founded by the Duke of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. But I think it will carry on, and it will continue to evolve because it fills a gap for young people to get involved in activities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to engage in. And what Adrian does nowadays with his pupils at his school is to broaden their horizons in a way that wouldn't otherwise be broadened. It's not just a tick box exercise, I think.
Can I?
Who is the leader of the? Who has taken his place in this country?
Oh, Prince Edward.
Edward.
Can I just add to what Edward was saying? I'd certainly agree. I think it now has an impetus of its own, which I think is extremely important. I think the other thing which makes it, and has always made it so very successful, is because I think it is very cleverly, if like, reflected the young people of the day that it finds itself in. So if you looked at our film, I mean, the film was very much of its day, of the 60s, the style, social attitudes, various other things, and with things people did because technology and other facilities weren't around. If you go and look at a modern Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, and if you follow you know, 3 or 4 local people as to what they're going to do in the scheme themselves these days. You'll find they're involved in technology, they're involved in more outward bound events, they're doing more technical things, they're expanding their horizons more because the facilities are there. And I think really that's one of the positives of the award scheme. It allows young people to draw on the experiences, I think, for their own life and challenges in the today that they find themselves in. And I think I would support, as I said, Edward's view that I think because of those things, it does have its own momentum. I think it will continue in its own way, whatever that will be in the future. And I think the concept, I think, is still going to be here for a long, long time. I mean, it's already been here for 60, 70 years. So, you know, that's longer than my house has been built. So,
Thank you. I do believe it's a very important part of the Duke of Edinburgh's legacy.
It is absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Tony.
There's no, just to say, there's no getting away from that, and I don't think people would want to. And I think it's one of those, almost one of those unwritten, unsaid things, whatever, you know, people's own views about His Royal Highness over his lifetime, is there were so many things he did, if you like, which were not spoken about or not put into the press, whatever. But I think the DofE scheme, I think the amount of work he personally put into it is underrated. But I'm glad that that's one of the things that still bear his name, because I think it's a great testament, you know, to him and to people like him, their belief in the young people of the country, not only then, but also today.
Thanks, Barry.
I've got a question for you, Barry, because what I'm beginning to understand is Service by Youth was an initiative in Buckinghamshire, that it was emulated in 2 other areas. But it was in Buckinghamshire, it gave rise to the Bucks Association of Youth Clubs, which was in turn a driving force behind the creation of Youth Clubs UK, or have I misunderstood that?
I think Jeff can correct us on that. I think it was more or less right, but
yeah, the Bucks Association of Youth Clubs was, if you like, a parallel organisation run by the local authorities from Aylesbury, and people like John Irving, John Plank were effectively the controlling centre for clubs to join the association, take part in activities, you know, like midnight skating at Richmond, roller skating at the Alexandra Palace and so on. I had the benefit of being a member not only of Chesham Boys Club, but also Charteris Youth Club. So I got involved with the Bucks Association of Youth Clubs, first of all as a junior leader at Charteris. And then some little later in my life, the long arm of Diana Coppesaro reached out and said that BAYC needed a new treasurer. So I was the treasurer for the next 25 years until it merged with the Boys Club to become Action for Youth in Buckinghamshire. So I think there's an immense benefit from the adults that were interested in us, were prepared to support us and made the arrangements for us to do, for example, our expeditions. Barry and I spent a very pleasurable Easter weekend in Dartmoor in the rain with the leaky tent provided by the Cornwall Local Education Authority. But the experiences we had from that have been tremendously, shall we say, character making, and we're friends to this day.
That's a nice thing to say.
I thought, if I may just briefly, Emily, I thought what Jeff, you were going to allude to was a little story you told me, reminded me of the other day, was that we were somewhere in Dartmoor on a rainy weekend doing our DofE awards scheme, and so we all pitched our tents in accordance with the instructions as how you pitch tents when you're in the wild. Only to be woken by, in the middle of the night, by Jeff, whose half of the tent was running with water because it was raining so hard, but surprisingly, mine was not. But none of that, I stayed dry, Jeff didn't, but we are still friends after 55 years or so.
I sat up with a cycle cape over me and under me, from about 1 o'clock in the morning until dawn at just after 6. But we still made it through the next day, so that is something.
Like you say, Jeff, that's character building, I think.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
I'd be interested to know if anyone else has any memories of voluntary work in Amersham in the 1960s and how this compares with their experience. I'm thinking Annie might have been around just about. Very young, obviously. Annie Hamilton Pike, you might have been around doing voluntary work in the 60s.
How dare you? Very, very dare you.
Of a job week.
Annie, we know how old you are.
Peter, thank you, dear boy. No, I didn't do any voluntary work in the 60s. I did go to the youth club at Little Missenden, which was, the heating in the village hall was horrendous because the overhead gas heat, all you got heated was the top of your bunts. We did drama of appallingly dreadful standard. There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, was one. I didn't do that. Remember snogging somebody in the bus shelter opposite the Red Lion. But anyway, that wasn't part of it. But cricket was my main thing, and that's what I did, and I coached that for ages. Not in the 60s, but I was playing then.
I do remember personally doing Meals on Wheels with my mum all round Old Amersham and Little Chalfont and things when I was back in school holidays, but that would be my limit.
I'm sure there are people with stories to tell. It might not be that they're here this evening, but it would be really interesting to find out. And I mean, from the museum's point of view, we run a young curators program now, which we get lots of young people, particularly those doing their bronze, Duke of Edinburgh, who are looking for somewhere locally to do their voluntary experience. And because they are quite young, I think sometimes they find it quite difficult to find somewhere. So I think currently we've got about 10 young people coming, and I'd say 3/4 of them are doing their Duke of Edinburgh, and they're using their time volunteering and helping at the museum as part of their placement. So from my point of view, it's something that's really thriving in Amersham. We get lots of people, and you know, I suppose what I really hope is that it reaches out to all people. A few of you have alluded to that it gives perhaps children that are less privileged an opportunity to get involved in some of the things that it offers, and I'm sure it does that. And you know, I think that's gives it extra value, really, you know, that it really helps those most in need. So it's a brilliant scheme, and thank you to all of you for helping promote it all the way back and being involved in it. And Edward, to your mum and her contribution, that's enormous. I don't know if you want to say something about her just to finish.
Well, she remembered doing this very fondly, and she was an inveterate letter writer, but I think one of her longest letter writing or Christmas card exchanging correspondences in her life was with Jeff. I don't think you missed a year from the 1960s onwards, did you, Jeff? And it's so it was something she was interested in. And more than just talking about her, I wanted to say something about Ron Haddock as well, because having not seen him since I was a small boy, I did meet him at the museum probably a year or two before he died, and he said, "Coppissaro," he said. The best thing I ever did was making that film, and it was in his memory. It was his film. He'd made it, and it really illustrated to me what an exciting project this was. I think in some of the cuttings that Ross found this afternoon, there was an indication that over £500 had to be raised for the making of this film, which was done through jumble sales, as Jeff pointed out, and also through a dinner dance at the Amersham Rural District Council offices, and grants from Bucks County Council, as it was then, and there was a huge community effort that went into making this. I think the other thing which is pretty clear, much clearer to me at the end of this evening rather than at the beginning, is that what started with these four that we've got and their friends, serviced by youth, has effectively given rise to a national youth club endeavour. There wasn't a national youth clubs organisation before, and I think that's provided a lot of the impetus behind it. So it might have been an unintended consequence, but I don't suppose the Duke of Edinburgh's award was intended to be a global phenomenon when the Duke of Edinburgh first thought of it. He just thought it was a good idea. And I think overall what it really shows is that there's no stopping a good idea. And this one seems to have started in and around Amersham.
Thank you, Edward, and well done to all of you. It's been absolutely lovely to be able to host it this evening. I am sorry about the little technical hitch, but as Peter said, when the video is put, the whole video of this evening is put on YouTube, he'll just put the film back in its complete form rather than how I managed to rupture it in two. So you'll be able to see the whole thing in one go. If you're interested, actually, Edward, you saying that, one of the most enjoyable evenings I've spent at the museum was when Ron Haddock came a few years ago and sat with our reminiscence group, and we watched some of his films, and they pointed out people they knew in the films, and he pointed out how he'd roped in all sorts of people in his own bits of filmmaking. So they're really wonderful. It'd be good to do a screening of some of those. But we do have on our website other bits of film footage of Amersham. If you click on Amersham History on our website, on the homepage there's a box that says film footage, and there's a series of links. We haven't got the actual films because of copyright, but if you just click the links, it will take you through to another website where you can watch things. So there's bits that you probably will have seen before, like the Betjeman Metroland, there's a link to that, but there's all sorts of bits of old film footage, so you can have a look there. And then if you want to look at this recording, it will be on our YouTube page. That we can send a link round to everyone who's participated this evening when it's up to, so they can access it.
Sorry, Remley.
No, go on.
Just one story about Ron. I've known him for many, many years. And Emily asked me to go and interview him at his home in Bachelor's Way. He said, I don't know if I remember anything. Well, I pressed the record button, and he didn't stop for 3 hours. I didn't have to ask him one single word. He's a wonderful character, and I was very fond of him.
And that interview, I think he gave us full, he signed over it as a full release. So if any of you would like to listen to it, if you email me, I'll send you, I can send you the interview to listen to if you've got 3 hours. So it's a wonderful.
I think it was edited by Pete actually, or somebody.
Yeah. But anyway, if you'd like to hear it, just email me, I can send it. Our next local stories is in February 23rd, and Martin Pounce is going to be talking a little bit about Tudor Amersham in advance of the next Martyrs play, which is in March. And then our March edition, I think, is also the 23rd, and that will be to tie in with International Month of Women in March. So we'll be doing something then about local women from the past. So thank you all for joining us. If you have any feedback or comments or questions, please do just get in touch. My email is emily@amershammuseum.org, and I hope to see you again at the next one or in the museum sometime soon. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for organising it, Emily. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.